All right, everybody, buckle up, because we're diving straight into a debate that's going on in Georgia right now
Hmm.
that has implications for the whole country, really.
Yeah.
And that is about election certification. Can local officials actually put the brakes on election results
Right.
if they suspect something's off, even if they don't have, hard proof?
And it's a fascinating question, and it gets right to the heart of trust in our elections.
Mm.
I mean, we're talking about a process, certification, that isn't just some formality. We're not talking about a rubber stamp at the end of election night.
Yeah.
It's this really important process to make sure every vote's counted right, that the outcome is actually what people decided.
And we sort of take that for granted today, that things are going to run smoothly.
We do.
But history's full of elections that have
Yeah.
been, disputed and contested, even violent.
Totally. Think about 1876, the presidential election.
Hmm.
We had a special electoral commission to figure out who won. And this whole thing was surrounded by accusations of fraud and voter suppression. And it really highlighted just how vital it is to have a trustworthy and a clear process for finalizing these results, and that's where the certification comes in.
Yeah, so this isn't just some technicality. This is really about the legitimacy of our
That
democracy
they
at
likely.
large.
And that's what makes what's happening in Georgia so important. It brings all of this to light,
Yeah.
all these questions.
So we have a court ruling
Uh,
and some brand new election rules that are kind of at odds with each other.
a bit of a contradiction, yeah.
Yeah.
So on one hand, you've got this ruling from Fulton County Superior Judge Robert McBurney, and essentially he's saying local election boards, they don't have the power to just refuse to certify election results because they have suspicions.
Hmm.
His argument is that giving individual officials that much power based on, just suspicion, that opens the door for problems, for chaos, maybe even abuse.
So even if they think something's wrong, even if they think there's fraud, they have to, by this ruling, certify the results anyway.
That seems to be his stance.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's really interesting is that Judge McBurney lives in a county where one of the board members refused to certify the results.
Wow.
So it's personal for him,
Yeah.
and his ruling seems to draw a line in the sand. He's saying local officials, yeah, they have some flexibility, some discretion in a lot of areas, but when it comes to certifying election results, that's not one of them.
But then we have these new rules that were passed by the Georgia State Election Board,
You do.
and they seem to contradict what the judge is saying.
Yeah, because these new rules basically give power to those same local boards, empowering them to conduct what they call a reasonable inquiry to make sure that the vote count is accurate before they go ahead and certify it.
So the judge is saying certify it, and the state board is saying we'll make sure it's right first.
Right.
How does that work?
That's a great question. And it's one that's being debated right now because you've got legal challenges popping up against these new rules.
Yeah.
And whatever happens with those is going to have some pretty big consequences.
So it seems like we have this, on the one hand, this group that wants to make sure that the process that we already have stays in place. We don't want people messing with it, potentially abusing power.
Right. And they're concerned that if you let individual officials just overturn elections without that solid proof, you could have chaos. You could erode people's trust in the whole system. It's about making sure the process itself is trustworthy.
And then on the other hand, you have those who say, look, we need these local boards to have more oversight. What if there's a mistake? We need to be able to catch that.
Exactly. And they're saying this idea of a reasonable inquiry, that's key. It's essential for transparency, for accountability.
Although reasonable inquiry, that could mean a lot of things to a lot of people.
Absolutely.
How do you even define what a reasonable inquiry is?
You've hit the nail on the head there.
It seems like there's a lot of wiggle room.
There is. And that's why this whole thing is so controversial. Yeah, and you can imagine that reasonable inquiry, that's going to mean different things to different people,
Right.
especially with how divided things are politically these days. Some people are worried that these rules could be twisted, used for political reasons.
So one party could use this reasonable inquiry to try and delay results if they don't like how things are going, or even, try to overturn an election they don't agree with.
That's the worry. And that's why you're seeing these legal challenges. You've got Democratic officials, voting rights groups, they're filing lawsuits trying to get rid of these new rules. They're saying these rules, they open the door for that kind of partisan interference, and that's exactly what we don't want.
So how does this all shake out? It's not like a local board just saying, nope, not certifying these results is the only way to, dispute an election. They
Yeah.
have recounts, we have audits,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely, you're right. Refusing to certify, that's a really extreme move. Think of it as like the last resort, the nuclear option.
Right.
Usually when you have concerns about an election, about whether things were done right, you deal with that in other ways. Like you said, recounts, audits, maybe even going to court, not just blocking the results outright.
So these new rules are adding like another layer of, I don't know, another thing to fight about in a process that's already really contentious.
Exactly. It's adding more fuel to the fire.
Yeah.
And what makes it even more complicated is, look, we're heading into a presidential election year with all of this still up in the air.
So we could be going right up to election day without knowing what the rules actually are.
And that uncertainty, that's a problem. It creates confusion for everyone, voters, people working the polls, even the candidates themselves. It's like trying to run a race when you don't know all the rules.
And you mentioned before, it's not just Georgia that's watching this.
Right? Other states are paying attention because if these rules in Georgia, if a court says, yeah, they're fine,
Yeah.
that could give other states ideas. They might say, hey, we can give more power to local officials to question election results too. It could have a ripple effect.
But on the other hand, if the courts say these Georgia rules are no good, that's a pretty strong message to everyone else that, no, we're serious about protecting elections, about stopping this kind of thing.
Exactly. It's a big deal. It could set a precedent.
And then you have to think about misinformation, right? I mean, this kind of uncertainty, this fighting back and forth, it seems like that's the perfect environment for misinformation to flourish.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge concern. We've seen what happens when false information about elections gets spread around, especially baseless claims about fraud. It makes people doubt the process. It can actually affect how they vote.
Yeah, like we saw after the 2020 election. So are these new rules in Georgia, all this debate surrounding them, could that lead to even more of that, more misinformation?
It's definitely possible. That's the worry. Because when you have so much uncertainty, when the rules themselves are being argued about, that creates an environment where doubt and suspicion can take hold. And that's how misinformation spreads. People are unsure, they're looking for answers, and sometimes they latch onto things that confirm their existing biases, even if those things aren't true.
So it's not just a legal battle, it's an information war going on at the same time.
You got it. And that's why it's so important for voters to be careful to really think about the information they're seeing and hearing, especially online. Don't just believe everything you read.
Okay, so we have a lot to digest here. This fight over who has the final say on elections, the possibility that this could spread to other states, and of course, this threat of misinformation making everything worse.
And all of this is happening in a country that's already really divided politically. It's a tough situation.
It's a lot. So I think our listeners are probably wondering right now, okay, but what does this mean for me? What am I supposed to do about it?
And that's the key question, right? It's easy to feel helpless when you're facing these big, complicated issues, but there are things we can all do.
Well, we've talked about a lot
Oh, yeah.
from how we got here. Why certification matters, going all the way back
Nice.
to these legal battles that are going on right now in Georgia and could, have ripple effects all over.
Absolutely.
It seems like it's about way more than just, signing off on some forms.
Right.
It's really about protecting democracy itself. But I mean, for our listeners who are out there, like me, kind of overwhelmed with all this, what's the takeaway? What do we do with all this information?
It's true. It can be a lot to process. I think the main thing to remember is that how we deal with these challenges, this tension between, accuracy and trust, that's going to determine what happens with our elections going forward. And we're figuring all that out right now.
It's not like it's just going to magically work itself out. We have to be a part of that.
Exactly. We all play a role in making sure elections are fair and that our democracy is strong. This isn't just about, lawyers and judges. It's about all of us, informed citizens getting involved.
So how do we go from feeling overwhelmed to, feeling like we can actually do something? What are some concrete things our listeners can do?
The first thing, and maybe the most important, is be careful about the information you're consuming. Don't just share every headline or social media post you see, especially if it gets you fired up. Take a beat. Look for sources you can trust, organizations that aren't trying to push a political agenda, the National Conference of State Legislatures, Brennan Center for Justice. Those are good places to start. They have a lot of good information about elections.
It does seem like a lot of what we're talking about comes down to trust.
Right.
Or a lack thereof. Like they say, sunlight's the best disinfectant.
Exactly. When people have accurate information, they're less likely to be misled or manipulated. And that leads to the second thing people could do, and that's make their voices heard. Contact your elected officials, local, state, national, doesn't matter. Let them know you're paying attention to these issues, you care about fair elections, and you expect them to feel the same way.
It's easy to feel powerless with all this stuff going on, but you're saying that our voices, as regular people, they actually matter.
Absolutely. Your voice matters. Your elected officials, they need to hear from you, not just during an election, but all year round. Let them know you're watching, you care, and you expect them to protect the integrity of our elections.
And of course, the most basic thing you can do in a democracy is participate in it.
Amen.
So get out there and vote.
I was just going to say that. Vote in every election, big or small, local or national, doesn't matter. Your vote is your voice. It's your chance to make a difference. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
Learned a lot, and I know I have. And it's a complicated issue. There's no easy solutions.
Right.
But I think we've shown there are things we can do
Right.
to make sure our elections are safe and fair.
The great thing about democracy is that it's always evolving. We're always working on it. But it needs our attention, our participation. We got to ask tough questions. If we stay informed, talk to each other constructively, and most importantly, vote, then we can make sure our elections really represent what people want.
And that's the goal, right?
That's it.
That's what we're all striving for.
Absolutely.
So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.
Stay curious, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.
See you then.